There is a moment in a woman's life when she becomes tired, not from doing too little, but from giving too much to the wrong places. Self-respect is a quiet decision that changes everything, even when nothing on the outside seems to move at first. It begins in small moments, often unnoticed by others, but deeply felt within. A woman who respects herself does not wait for permission to feel worthy. She does not depend on constant reassurance to believe she matters. Instead, she becomes aware of how she is being treated, and more importantly, how she is treating herself in response to that treatment. This awareness is where her power begins to grow. In daily life, this can look very simple. Imagine a situation where someone repeatedly cancels plans at the last minute. Before, she might have accepted it, made excuses for them, or rearranged her schedule again and again just to keep the connection alive. But with self-respect, something shifts. She no longer ignores the pattern. She calmly acknowledges it and decides not to keep adjusting her life around inconsistency. She may say less, but her actions speak clearly. She stops making herself so available to someone who does not value her time. In another situation, consider a conversation where her feelings are dismissed or minimized. Instead of over-explaining or trying harder to be understood, she recognizes that being heard is not something she has to fight for endlessly. She might express herself once, clearly and calmly, and if it is not received with respect, she chooses to step back rather than continue in a cycle that drains her. This is not about shutting down or avoiding communication. It is about knowing when continued effort no longer serves her well-being. Self-respect also shows in the way she speaks to herself. If she makes a mistake, she does not tear herself down with harsh inner criticism. Instead, she acknowledges the mistake, learns from it, and moves forward without losing her sense of worth. This inner stability reflects outwardly. People begin to notice that she does not tolerate being treated as an afterthought, not because she demands attention, but because she no longer accepts less than she deserves. Over time, this creates a natural shift in how others respond to her. Not everyone will understand it, and not everyone will stay. But the connections that remain are often more genuine and balanced. Her energy is no longer spent trying to prove her value. It is protected, directed, and given with intention. There is a subtle strength in learning to say less, yet meaning more. Many people believe that clarity comes from explaining again and again, adding more words, more reasons, more emotion. But in reality, too many words often dilute the message. When a woman begins to understand this, she starts to choose her words with care, not out of fear, but out of awareness. She realizes that not every situation requires a long explanation, and not every person is willing to understand, no matter how much is said. At first, this lesson can feel uncomfortable. There is a natural urge to clarify, to defend, to make sure one is not misunderstood. But over time, she notices a pattern. Those who truly listen do not need endless explanations, and those who do not listen will not be convinced by them. This realization becomes a turning point. Instead of pouring her energy into long conversations that lead nowhere, she begins to express herself in a simple, direct way. For example, when someone crosses a boundary, she does not deliver a long speech trying to justify why it hurt her. She may simply say, "I'm not comfortable with this," and leave it there. The power is not in the length of the sentence, but in the certainty behind it. If the other person respects her, they will understand. If they do not, no amount of explanation would have changed that. In another moment, when she feels unappreciated, she does not list every instance where she felt overlooked. She recognizes the pattern and responds with quiet adjustment. She reduces her effort where it is not valued. This is also a form of communication, one that does not rely on words, yet speaks clearly to those who are paying attention. There is also wisdom in knowing when silence is more meaningful than speech. Not every comment deserves a reply, and not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected immediately. Sometimes stepping back creates space for truth to reveal itself without force. This is not about suppressing thoughts or emotions. It is about choosing the right moment and the right amount of expression. As this habit develops, her presence begins to change. People listen more closely when she speaks, because her words are no longer scattered or excessive. They carry intention. They carry clarity. Each sentence reflects a mind that is disciplined and a heart that is not seeking validation, but simply expressing truth. There comes a point where continuing to chase only creates more distance, not closeness. A woman begins to notice that the more she tries to hold on to something that is slipping away, the more she loses herself in the process. At first, it feels like effort is the answer. If she tries harder, gives more, understands more, maybe things will return to how they once were. But slowly, she realizes that effort without mutual care becomes exhaustion, not connection. Walking away is often misunderstood as giving up. In truth, it is a decision to stop investing energy where it is no longer valued or returned. It does not happen in anger or impulsiveness, but through quiet observation. She starts to see patterns instead of isolated moments, promises that are not kept, attention that fades without explanation, words that do not match actions. These patterns speak louder than temporary affection, and she begins to trust what she sees rather than what she hopes for. In everyday situations, this shift can be simple but powerful. Imagine she is always the one initiating conversations, sending messages, making plans. At some point, she pauses, not to test or manipulate, but to observe. If the connection fades the moment she steps back, she understands that it was being carried by her effort alone. Instead of chasing to keep it alive, she accepts what is being shown to her and chooses not to force what is not naturally there. In another case, she may find herself repeatedly explaining her needs, hoping that clarity will create change. But when the same behavior continues, she recognizes that understanding is not the issue. Priority is. Rather than repeating herself, she honors her own words by taking action. She withdraws from the situation, not as punishment, but as protection of her peace. Walking away also means letting go of the need for immediate closure. Not every situation will offer a clear ending or satisfying explanation. She learns to accept unanswered questions without chasing answers that may never come. This requires inner strength because the mind often seeks resolution, but she chooses stability over temporary relief. As she practices this, her energy begins to return to her. Time that was once spent overthinking or trying to fix things is now directed toward her own growth, her own calm, her own direction. The act of walking away becomes less about losing something and more about regaining herself step by step in a way that feels steady and real. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, as if not responding means having nothing to say. But there is a kind of silence that is chosen, not forced, and it carries a depth that words cannot always reach. A woman begins to understand that reacting to everything does not make her stronger. It only makes her more predictable and easier to pull into unnecessary conflict. When she steps back from the need to respond immediately, she creates space between what happens and how she chooses to engage with it. At first, this restraint can feel unfamiliar. There is an impulse to reply, to correct, to defend. But she starts to notice that many situations lose their power when they are not fed with constant reaction. Not every comment deserves her attention, and not every misunderstanding needs to be chased down and resolved in the moment. By remaining silent, she is not ignoring reality. She is choosing not to be controlled by it. In daily interactions, this becomes visible in subtle ways. Someone may say something dismissive or provocative, expecting a reaction. Instead of responding with the same energy, she remains calm and does not engage. This silence is not empty. It signals that she will not participate in conversations that lack respect. Over time, people begin to recognize that they cannot easily pull her into arguments or emotional exchanges that go nowhere. In another moment, when she feels hurt or disappointed, she does not immediately express everything in a rush of emotion. She allows herself time to understand what she truly feels. This pause gives her clarity. When she eventually speaks, her words are measured and grounded, not reactive. And sometimes she realizes that speaking is not even necessary. The situation reveals itself without her needing to add anything more. Silence also becomes a way of observing. When she stops filling every gap with words, she starts to see more clearly. She notices tone, consistency, and intention in others. She becomes aware of what is said and what is left unsaid. This awareness strengthens her judgment, allowing her to respond wisely rather than impulsively. There is also strength in walking away without explaining everything. Not every exit requires a detailed justification. Sometimes silence protects her energy better than any explanation could. It keeps her from being drawn back into cycles that she has already outgrown. Over time, this quiet discipline becomes a part of her presence, shaping how others approach her and how she moves through situations with calm control. Valued begins as an internal standard, not something assigned by others. A woman who understands this stops measuring herself through inconsistent attention, temporary praise, or comparison. She starts to notice how easily self-worth can become tied to how others respond, how quickly a delayed message, a lack of recognition, or a change in tone can affect how she feels about herself. With awareness, she begins to separate her identity from these shifting external signals and grounds it in something more stable. This shift often appears in small, everyday decisions. For example, if she has a skill or talent, she no longer downplays it just to appear more acceptable or less intimidating. When someone asks what she does, she speaks about it with clarity instead of minimizing it. She does not exaggerate, but she also does not shrink. This balance reflects a quiet confidence that does not depend on approval. In relationships, valuing herself changes what she accepts and what she gently steps away from. Imagine she is in a situation where communication is inconsistent, warm one day, distant the next. Before, she might have tried to decode every message, wondering what she did wrong. Now, she recognizes that consistency is a basic form of respect. Instead of overanalyzing, she adjusts her involvement. She gives her time and attention where it is met with the same steadiness. This is not about judging others. It is about aligning her energy with what feels balanced and healthy. In another scenario, she might be offered an opportunity that does not truly match her worth, whether it is underpaid work or a role that overlooks her abilities. Rather than accepting it out of fear of missing out, she takes a moment to evaluate it honestly. She asks herself whether this aligns with the effort and value she brings. If it does not, she is willing to decline or negotiate, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. This decision reinforces her belief that her time and effort have real value. Valuing herself also shows in how she treats her own needs. She does not constantly place herself last in every situation. If she needs rest, she allows it without guilt. If something feels overwhelming, she acknowledges it instead of pushing through to the point of exhaustion. These choices may seem simple, but they build a foundation of self-trust. As this mindset deepens, others begin to notice a difference. She no longer seeks validation in the same way, and this changes how she is perceived. Her presence becomes more grounded, her decisions more intentional, and her interactions more balanced. The respect she gives herself quietly shapes the respect she receives. And in the end, it was never about forcing the world to notice her. It was about no longer abandoning herself just to be seen. She stopped speaking where she was not heard. She stopped chasing where she was not valued. She stopped explaining where she was not understood, not out of pride, but out of clarity, because she finally realized something simple, yet powerful. Attention that must be chased is not respect. Love that must be begged for is not love. And a place where she must shrink is not where she belongs. So she became still, not empty, but grounded, not distant, but centered. And in that stillness, her presence changed. She no longer entered rooms trying to prove anything. She no longer stayed where her energy felt heavy. She no longer waited to be chosen. She chose herself, quietly, consistently, without announcement. And that is the moment everything shifted. Because the world does not ignore a woman who is aligned with herself. It adjusts to her, not because she demands it, because she no longer accepts anything less, and without saying much, without forcing attention, without asking to be seen, she becomes someone impossible to overlook.